Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi, Demai, Perek Gimel, Halacha Beis, and God willing, starting Halacha Gimel. We are learning that Chav Zayin. We left off on that Chav Zayin, Amud Aleph, by the two dots on the top of the Amud. 2 lines from the top of the Amud. The Gemara is continuing to explain the second part of the Mishnah that had this huge chiddush, that when you are sharpening in a market and you pick up vegetables, if your intention is to acquire it, even if you change your mind and you put the vegetables back down, even though you didn't pay for it, then the Mishnah added words that will have to be further clarified, right? That she'eino ma'asid ela minyan. I know when we learned the Mishnah, we quoted the Pnei Moshe. We're going to dive into this today, and we're going to actually see that there's going to be a machloekes amoyroyim, a machloekes between Rabbi Yechanan and Chizkiah, whether the person who puts it back down, whether he must pay for the meises that he has to remove, or whether he does not have to pay, which will be a much bigger chiddush. Because if he doesn't have to pay for it, then as we will see, it's not so simple to put it back down. He for sure cannot put it back down stam, because then the person later who's going to acquire those vegetables won't know that this is meiser sheni, or this is trumas meiser. Things will get a little bit more complicated once we go into more details, but we're going to have 2 ways of understanding the Mishnah. There's going to be a lot of novelties in today's stuff, particularly when it comes to taking something that belongs to someone else that is insignificant, that there is a place where one will be allowed to do so. Now, of course, we know B'chlal, when it comes to the laws of Gezela, that what's punishable by the Torah is if a person stole or robbed, God forbid, a pruta's worth or more. But less than that is not a lot, right? Chatzi shita is also min ha-Torah, and according to most, this applies not only to food items, to all items. Nevertheless, as we will see, there is a place where if something is so insignificant, you are allowed to take it without paying for it. That will be very much related to the sugya. The Gemara will also clarify in the second part of the Mishnah the other scenario. We spoke about when we learned the Mishnah, and that is, as we explained, as the Gemara explains, that if a customer picks up vegetables without the intent yet to acquire it, he's picking it up to inspect it, then the person, of course, can put it back down without needing to separate any of the demai separations. That will be more or less the topic until Halacha Gimel. And in the new Mishnah, on the Chav Zayin Amud Beis and Halacha Gimel, we're going to have a din that follows the same principle. And here the case will be that if someone finds produce without a siman, in other words, something that's hefker on the side of the road, and you pick it up with intent to acquire it, and then you change your mind, it's not worth it. It has so little value, and it's so heavy, or it's a schlep for you, or whatever other reason, and you put it back down, the same concept. That once you acquire produce, if halachically it's considered demai, you, a chaver, are not allowed to put it back down. You have to take off. The Trumas Somaises will learn a milsa agab orcha, that when you find food on the side of the road, it's important for you to make an effort, even if when you're not acquiring it, for you to put it to the side of the road for people not to trample on it and to ruin it. And we will have as well another klal, another big idea in Halacha Gimel, and that is that even though that when you're sending a gift, you also have the klal that you are not allowed to send a gift prior to properly separating Trumas U'Maises as a produce gift. But as we learned in the second chapter, that we differentiate between, by a seller, between a wholesaler and a retailer, midagasa, midadaka, and by midagasa, by the wholesaler, we said we have 2 reasons in the Gemara, but bottom line is that such a person does not have to separate the demai separations. Same thing will be by a gift. That the moment the quantity of the gift, even though you're not getting any money, but if the quantity of the gift is the quantity of the midagasa, I think that was on that Chav Gimel when the Mishnah explained exactly what that is, whether the Mishnah gave a share in the solids and a money amount for the liquids, or the Braisa that reversed it, the same will apply to a gift. By midagasa, you need not separate. Only by midadaka do you have to separate the demai separations. And according to the Tana Rabbi Yossi, there is an exception, and that is that if a person will gift tevel vadai, there, even if you're giving a small amount, you don't need to separate the bona fide, the real meisters, the Truma Gedoyla, and all of the meisters, as we will see, God willing, when we learn this inside. 2 lines from the top by the 2 dots. So this is referring back to Halacha Beis, to the second part of the Mishnah, that this great novelty that you pick something up in the market and you put it back down, and you don't have to, you're chayiv to tithe it, even though you're now changing your mind, but since you intended to buy it, so to say, it's yours. Now, let's go with more details. Says the Gemara, like we mentioned, we'll have a machlokes between Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan. Chizkiah Amar, that Einoi, now there's different gersois. Einoi mechuser laba olim elaminyan, as we quoted in the introduction, in the Mishnah, Daf Chavav. I'm reading now the Mishnah, the Nimlach lahachsid, and you change your mind and you put it back down. So the Mishnah says, Lo yachsid, achi ya'asid. So far, so good, right? We explained you have to separate the my separations, but now comes this one liner that the words don't make sense. She'enoi ma'asid elaminyan. And if you remember, we learned the Pnei Moshe, and the Pnei Moshe says that the word ma'asid here doesn't mean ma'asid, doesn't mean maistis. The word ma'asid has to be read she'ena chassid enaminyan. This one-liner is explaining, why are you chayiv to tithe it? You did not buy it yet. So the Mishnah says, since all that was needed was to count, that's why you did acquire it. So let's learn like this. Einoi mechusa laba olim ela minyan. Says the Pnei Moshe over here. Let's read 10 lines from the top in the Pnei Moshe. Chizkiah Amar Einoi mechusa laba olim ela b'schiyas minyan. Kein tzarich loimer b'tevas hefker ta'us hatfus, etc., etc. Says the Pnei Moshe, Chizkiah balafarish. Chizkiah is explaining that diktoni halakei achyarak menakshuk b'chuli she'ena me'usar hainu she'ena mechuser. Like we learned in the Mishnah, the word me'usar means mechuser. He's changing the girsa. I don't think he's changing the interpretation. Masan means to tithe. She'ena mechuser laba'alam she'itnu lazeh lekeach ela b'schias minyan. Here's the issue, and perhaps we have to make a little bit of a correction. I don't remember exactly what I said when I learned the Mishnah, but one thing is clear, guys. If I pick up something with the intent to acquire it, if I don't know what the price is, that intent does not affect my hagbah to make a kinyan. Because it's possible that when I will find out the price that I never knew, I won't want to buy it. Okay? And indeed, the Mishnah speaks about a scenario where you don't know the price. However, now here's the word of Chizkiah. You don't know the price. When we learned the Mishnah, we gave an example. Today, when you go to many markets, so you have these bags, and you have the price per pound on any given item of produce. And you fill up your bag. You want to have a couple of apples, if not per apple, or let's go per weight. And then you weigh it later. When you check out, you weigh it. Even though I don't know the exact price of my bag, I know the price per pound. And I agree to that. And that's why, even though I don't know how much exactly will this bag cost, all I need to know is the minion here would mean the weight. Or another example. Let's say that the market is selling produce per item, per number. So it's $1 an apple. And this person grabbed the basket and he filled it up with apples. And the buyer did not yet count it. He wanted a basket full of apples. He has what he wants. He knows it's $1 per apple. He doesn't know whether in the basket you have 50 apples or whether you have 45 apples. He also acquires it. He doesn't know the exact price. He knows the price per unit. He just didn't count how many units he has in the basket. That's what Chizkiah is saying. Continuing in the Pnei Moshe. In other words, since he knows the price, whether it is per unit, he knows the price, whether it is per pound, even though he doesn't know exactly how many units he took or how many pounds he picked up, that knowledge of how much it is per unit or per pound is enough for us to say that he knows the price. He doesn't know exactly how much he will pay for what he has in his hand, but he knows the price. And since he picked it up to acquire it, that's why he acquires it. That's the first thing that Chizkiah is saying. And he's reading, like we learned in the Mishnah, the Pnei Moshe. The word she'ena ma'asid, it's not she'ena ma'asid elo lefi minyan. She'ena mechused. All you need is the exact minyan, but you know the price per minyan. That's why you acquire it. Okay, so that's step number one. Or let me just say this to make it clear, that if a person goes to the market and they don't yet know the price per unit, they don't yet know the price per pound, and they fill up a bag, even though they intend now to buy it, they did not acquire. And therefore, if they change their mind, they are allowed to put it back down without separating the demai separations. There has to be the knowledge of the price. Okay. Now, now comes Chizkiah to address exactly what does he do. So he has to be ma'asid, but he's not buying any of it. So he has a big chiddush. Says Chizkiah that noitel minha elyon u'mesaken. Now we will interpret the word elyon. Elyon means the leaves. The leaves. In other words, he doesn't separate the demai separations from the actual vegetables, which are relatively more chashuv. He separates the demai separations from a part of the produce that is considered relatively insignificant. Edible, if not, you wouldn't be able to separate the demai separations, but he does that, meaning he doesn't have to pay for it. He mamish separates it. He only takes it minha elyon. Another word of elyon is that, when you have, let's say, you have a cabbage head, you have a lettuce head. So the outermost leaves are the ones that are the least chashuv because they turn brown quicker. Everyone handled them. They're dirty. You understand? But they're still considered leaves. They're still considered produce. You are allowed to be ma'asad from it for the rest. Even though it's insignificant, even though you're taking off from minha elyon, let's go with the words leaves, still flagging them out of it. Bottom line is, you picked up 10 pounds of produce. How much are you putting back down? You're not exactly putting down 10 pounds. You're only putting down 9 pounds. Because the other pound, let's speak about Meiser Sheni, you're leaving as Meiser Sheni. You're not putting back what you took. Okay? So the Gemara says, indeed, that's exactly the point of Chizkiah, and I will prove to you from 2 stories, not 1 story, 2 stories, that when a person takes something that's considered very financially insignificant, there is a point in which we say he's not a gazlan. And Kahada, like the following stories, beginning with story number 1, that Rab Shimon bar Kahana hava misamach leRabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar had a hard time walking, and Rab Shimon bar Kahana was his mishamesh by Shimon Shamina Chachamim. And as they were walking, as Rab Shimon is supporting him, Avrun al Chad Kiram or Kerem, where they passed by a certain vineyard that was surrounded with a fence. And Amalei said, the great Amayra Rabbi Lazar, to his mishamesh Rab Shimon bar Kahana, Aiseli Chad Kesam Mechat Sat Shinai, please take out a little splinter from the fence of the vineyard for me to pick my teeth. They got a little piece of wood from the fence. That's the first thing that he requested. Wow. And look inside the Maraful, the 50 lines from the top of the Amid. It's more or less the middle of the Amid. Kadod Rab Shimon doesn't even have a Bar Kahana. But anyways, have a Mesamach Rabbi Lazar. At least in all of Halafway. And Amalei and Rabbi Lazar tells Rab Shimon, I simply case him and I get it. Please bring a little splinter. Lachatzois Shinayim. For me to be able to pick my teeth. Why did he feel that he has the right to do it, even though he was not paying for it? Because then when the owners are completely not makpid, it doesn't matter. However, Chazad, back in the Gemara, Rabbi Lazar corrected himself. And he told him, don't do that. Because the in are saying, because if you will do what I asked you, kol bar nash, ubar nash me'ebed kain, every person will feel free to take a splinter, and ha'asl siyaga de guvra, and this person's fence will disappear. Like the Pnei Moshe concludes in the Divrei HaMasal that we started called Kahadod Rab Shimon, Ela shechazar boy, shelo yiru achedim v'yasu kamoisoi, and then say so azolei kol hageder. Okay, which implies, this is important, that without this concern, there was a concern that others, if everyone will take a splinter, at some point there'll be nothing left. But if you would not have that concern, just him taking the splinter would be permissible. Goslin, and don't come with the pruta, like we spoke on in the introduction. Let's go with the opinion of the majority that the concept of chatzi shir, which we paskin like Rabbi Yechon, and is also in the Torah, is also by everything, not only by food items. We apply it to Hilchos Shabbos, we apply it to Rashi and Meshach Shabbos. We spoke that out. Let's apply it to Gezela. Right there, over there in Sodom, they outsmarted Chachamim Lohara the system by stealing less than a pruta, not being taken to court. No one will adjudicate a case that's less than a pruta, but it's not permissible. But this is different. It's not because it's less than a pruta, because a splinter from a fence is considered insignificant, unless you have this outer chashash. That's story number one. It's amazing that we are comparing this to a person, to a client in a vegetable store, in a market, putting back down with less, almost 11%, right? Because he's taking off 1% for Trumas Meiser. He's taking off then from the remainder 10% for Meiser Sheni. Like, wow. Nevertheless, since he's only taking it from the leaves, the owner is okay with it. Back another story. It's interesting in both scenarios. It's a story of one Amayra being Meshamish another. Rab Chage was supporting Rab Zera. They were working by a certain person that was carrying a load, and the load was of wood splinters or of toothpicks. I would say wood splinters. Maybe toothpicks are more chashuv. The fact that they were manufactured to be a toothpick. This is pashat, taking a little piece out of a broken piece of wood. Amalei, same thing. Rab Zera asked the Amoida that had the merit to be Meshamishim, Aisulichat Kesam, the Nechet Shinai, please get me a splinter from this load without pay. Just take a splinter for me to, he had something stuck in his teeth. And again, here also, that Chazad v'Amalei, Rab Zera corrected, and he told Rab Chagai, don't bring anything. The in asi, because if you will, kol chad barnash, ubarnash, everyone will see. Ume'ebat kain, and ha'azla mechla de guvran, and this entire load will be gone. By the way, this is a much bigger chiddush, because by the fence, think about it, the fence, I would say it's less problematic to take a splinter. In both of these stories, if not for the fear that others will copy, if not for that, it would be permissible. By a fence, it's easier to relate. So what? I don't care. If I have a fence, a wooden fence, you take a splinter, I don't care. I'll only care if everyone will do it. But if I have a load, if I'm carrying the wood, even if it's not toothpicks, if I'm carrying a load of wood, I want the wood. But here also Chazal say that if not for the concern that others will do so, one splinter is considered so insignificant, it's not considered B'nei and Gezel. And on that, Chizkiah is making the correlation, which is the biggest chiddush to the case of our Mishnah. Now the Gemara is going to push a little bit further before we come back to Rabbi Yechanan, who argues with Chizkiah. Says the Gemara that Loi Rab Zera kosher kol chen. Rab Zera was not so overly kosher, so overly farfrumed. Elamilan de Yitzran Shamalon, that Ne'eb Dinan, he was concerned that when it comes to other matters where there is a greater Yetzer Hara, right? There is where, look how far-fetched it is. Really, by the case of the wood, the guy who's schlepping a load of wood, or even a load of wood splinters, Rab Zera wasn't even concerned that others will take and deplete the guy's load. Because how many wood splinters do people need? It's not like everyone has a taiva to get a toothpick. It's an anomaly. If something gets stuck between the teeth, if whoever had teeth then, say that they took a little splinter of wood. Rab Zera was concerned that if they're going to see him taking this item that's insignificant, then when it comes to other items that are also in a quantity of insignificance, but the item itself might be something that more people want, there it might get depleted. In other words, look inside the Marafulda. Loi Rab Zera. Loi she Rab Zera ho yochasid kol kach harbe umedadbek yoisen midai. Sharei ein kam shum nidnud isur gezel. Wow. The miyadagdek, who will care al kesam echad? Elom she mitzvahs yoitzreinu hashmiyenu v'hizadnu shenase. He was giving us guidance of what God would want for us to abstain from. So therefore, hechmed gam kein afshu shel tzarich lachmer kol kach. It's amazing. It's even here he wouldn't do it just for the wood splinters, like we explained. All of this is to make the point that when you take something that's considered very, very insignificant, there is no issue with Gezeilim. And therefore, Chizkiah has this huge chiddush that the Mishnah says, he has to tithe the produce that he took. He doesn't have to pay for it. He tithes it and he puts it back down. Now, Omar, Rababo, b'shem Rabbi Yechanan. First of all, he will agree with Chizkiah's interpretation of the words. I'm going back to the Mishnah Daf Chavav in Halacha Beis she'eino ma'aser ela minyan. I agree with those words. That what kiven shemashach kaneh. Why he didn't pay? He didn't know the price. That was the issue. Because the reason why he didn't, there's two ways of not knowing the price, like we spoke out. There's not knowing the price, mamish not knowing the price. Then even if you have intent, doesn't mean anything. Because if you would find out the price, you might change your mind. L'chatchila, it's not called the Gemidas Das. Our Mishnah is that you knew the price, whether it is per number, whether it is per pound, whether it is however they would. You don't know the exact measurement. You don't know the quantity. You don't know the weight. So there is a lack of knowledge, but this lack of knowledge doesn't stop the kinyan from taking effect. So here, Rabbi Yechanan and Chizkiah are on the same page by them not reading the word she'ena ma'asid ela lefi minyan, but she'ena ma'asid is an explanation the Mishnah is giving. She'ena mechusat ela minyan. You know the price per minyan, and therefore you acquired it. So here, Rabbi Yechanan and Chizkiah are in agreement. However, now they part ways. However, Keitzad hu I okay, now that the Mishnah says that in this scenario, the theoretical purchaser cannot just put it back down on the shelf. He has to separate the mai. Let's say if you got to actually pay for the meisters that you are removing. Very good. Look inside the last marafulda, the end of the Amid. That umachzeli ashadu paligad Rab Chizkiah the sfiralei ben haba'olim noitel umesaken. Wow. Okay, you got to pay for it. Now, by the way, now that you pay for it, you have to keep it. And so you're going to pay for it. You're going to give the Trumas Maisa to a kohen, turning to the Chav Zayin on the base, on top of the Amid, and you're going to eat your Maisa Sheni in Yerushalmi, or you'll be poided. Okay. So now, the Gemara's Kasha, let's go, is going to go according to Chizkiah. You're putting it back down? How can you put it back down? You cannot put something back down. Guys, don't forget that if you walk into a market, if the owner is an Amaretz, right? Or even if the owner is a Chaver Barechveis, he's a Sitan, it's a wholesaler. Or whenever the rule is that the purchaser, I'm chayiv to separate the Demai separations. How does Demai separations work? That you take a bund 10 and you begin to separate from the 10. Because all of them are in the same category, right? We learned so many times together that even though I don't have to separate from one bundle for itself, if I have 2 bundles or 3 bundles or 4 bundles, I can separate one for the other, but that's only if they are all under the same umbrella of obligation. Right? Once something is fully rectified, it cannot be used to be masak on something else. So think about it. You go into the market, you're going to put it back down, and now what? And now another guy is going to come. He'll have no idea what happened before. As far as he's concerned, everything is the mind, when it's not true. He might pick up your apple. He might pick up another apple. Everything was. By the way, the kasha is even according to Rabbi Yechanan. You're going to take away the your trumas ma'aser, but the rest is not the mai anymore. The rest is not the mai. Then imagine someone might take off from it for the neighboring demai, it would not work. Or someone will take up from the neighboring demai for it won't work. Trumas Meiser is 1% from that which has to be tithed. If not, it's not Trumas Meiser. The whole thing is going to get off. You understand? So the Gemara answers that that when you put it back down, you have to put it down on a separate pile. And when you put it down on a separate pile, any chaver will understand what happened. Now, did they make the pile look unique? Could be, I don't know. But the way people would put out the produce in a market, this would look different. And when this would look different, it would make sure that if a chaver will come next, he'll see from the way it's separated on the shelf, he'll figure out, there must have been someone that came before me. Well, he's having Yerushalmi working everything out to the greatest details. Okay. Now the Gemara has the final question. That if I have in my house then the mai, even if I'm a chaver, if I have in my house the mai, and I go to this market, why are we trying to say that I have to separate it from it? Right? Chizkiah says I have to take off leaves. Rabbi Yechanan says, well, no, you got to take off and you got to pay for it. Why? Why isn't there the option of me to make a verbal declaration that the produce that I have in my house, some of that should be the Trumas Meiser for this, another part of it should be the Meiser Sheni for that? Would that work? So we say that and that's an option, as we learned. Did we not learn in a Braisa that that there are other times that I'm allowed to do such a thing. I don't have to separate it from the produce itself. If this has a chiyuv and I know that I have in my house other produce that's equally still demai, I can say that from there I'm taking off for here. Even though, in other words, you can argue you can't do that because you might forget what you did. You might come back home and forget that you make that declaration. Even though one could have argued there is such a chashash, we don't have such a chashash. So back into our Mishnah, why do you have to separate it from this produce itself? Why don't we make him make a declaration from the produce that he has in his home? Why is that not an option? Answers the Gemara, the only time that Chachamim allowed for you to say that instead of me separating produce from here, on the rest that's here, I can separate from what I know is in my home. I'm only allowed to do that when I'm a purchaser, when I actually buy it, and not in the case of our Mishnah. Wow. I'll tell you why, and I'll tell you our logic. Think about it, guys. The whole Mishnah is difficult. When you learn the Mishnah the first time, and I'm going to a market, I mean, it's how many times did it happen to you over here? You go to a market, you pick something up, you put it in your cart, and then you change your mind. Here we're saying you're chayiv to be ma'aseret. Okay, you're chayiv to be ma'aseret, but if you won't actually separate it, if you're going to make a verbal declaration, I have in my house, I have a bag of apples, may that, whatever the right amount should be for this, you might forget that you made that declaration. You might forget. Because you don't really feel like you're chayiv because you didn't buy it. So when you bought it, then such a declaration is valid. In our case of the Mishnah, there is no such option. You have to make a separation. The machlokes is from whom's. According to Chizkiah, you don't have to buy. You're taking it. Theft, insignificant. According to Rabbi Yechanan, you have to pay for it. Okay. We're good? We're good. Now we're going into the final case of the second part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah used the words Hoya Oimed Veloikeach. And the word Loikeach sounds like you're buying. So why is it that in the last case of the Mishnah, you don't have to take off anything? So, the thing is, we already interpreted. Loikeach doesn't mean you bought it. If you picked it up, not with the intent to buy, you picked it up with the intent to inspect. And then it didn't meet your standard. You can put it back down. You don't have to do anything. Okay.
Really, the lesson is if you ever go to a market, always tell yourself, I don't intend to buy.
Tell yourself, I intend to buy when I check out. Right. I'm right now contemplating.
And there's no problem.
If you have that intention, it's no problem. I spoke this out when we learned the Mishnah. I'm just curious. I know we spoke about this in the Bible. What is the halacha? We had sugyas. If in the market today, you have your cart, what happens if I take something out of your cart? Right. According to what we're learning here, it depends on the intent of the first guy. Right. If he knows the price, the general price, if he intended to buy it, it's his. Yeah. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's what I think. Okay. Now, it clarifies the Gemara, Keni Masnisa. Really, what the Mishnah means, even though in the final part of the second, the final clause of the second part of the Mishnah uses the words Hayoimed Veloy Keach, it doesn't mean Veloy Keach. It means Hayoimed Uboide. See, that's the key. But it means you're inspecting. If your intent is only to inspect, then you did not acquire it. I want to go back to what I just said. If I put something in my cart already, that's not called inspecting. Like, what gives me the right to put it in my cart if I don't plan to buy it? I'm taking it away from you if there's a limited amount. Okay, it's open. I have this thing open. Okay. Now, final nuance that the Gemara wants to get into is at Kidoin. How do I know that this is my intention? How do I even know, it's my intention? Forget about me knowing you, me knowing me. If I'm looking at apples and I pick up an apple and I put it back down and I pick up another apple, that's like an indication. Yeah, I was looking for the best apple.
And there's a whole range.
And there's a whole range. So that's why you see, I put it down because I changed my mind. I never really. But what happens if I pick up an apple and I put down the apple and I picked up an orange? Don't forget, the moment, if there was a moment in which I intended to buy it, we are saying that my Hakbah, my Meshicha, affected a kingdom. Even though I'm changing my mind, so what? You have to be ma'aseh. So asks Gemara at Kedoin that when we say that if a person picked up and he put it back down, he picked up and he put it back down, we understand that he's just inspecting it. That's if he picked up again, he put down and he picked up from the same type, a better quality one. At Kedoin bo'isa min. But what happens? Afilu min acher. The Gemara is asking, do we apply this even by yamin acher? Maybe by yamin acher, the very fact that I put down an apple and I picked up an orange, that means that there was a moment that I wanted an apple, and when I wanted the apples, I was going to keep this. I only put it back down because I decided I'm not the Rockefeller. I can't afford apples and oranges. You know what? Instead of apples, I'm getting oranges. But that was the second thought. My first thought was to keep it. And maybe I have to be mass. Look inside the Marav Fulda. 4 lines under the Gemara. At Kedoin bo'isa min, shu oisa ku bayreir, that us shopping nuchalaymer shulaykana harishain shekain derech livroid lahaniach. That's the normal way. When people are in the phase of inspection, how do you inspect? You ever go to an Essex store? That's what people are doing. Picking up, they're putting down, they're picking up, they're putting down, they're picking up, they're putting down. But if the guy was doing that while he was picking up one species of vegetables, like apples, and then he puts down the apples and he takes min acher. So the Gemara is asking, do we also say that he did not acquire it and taka he can put it back down without tithing it? Or maybe not. Or should we say, he didn't take any of the first time. Actually, what it really happened is that there was a moment where he already decided on the apple. It's just like later he said, I don't want apples, I want oranges. And I don't want both. I can't afford both. And if that will be the case, then then he may not put it back down. And you know what? Why don't we ask him? He's not trusted for himself. Like, what was your real intent? Ask any person what their intent is. They really believe their intent was Aleph. And then sometimes, not always, if you go with them, you entertain other intentions, you can discover that behind or under the more revealed intent, there was another intent. And behind that was another intent. Which one counts? Gavaldi. And the Yerushalmi just leaves this open. No, it's be aware of this. I'm suggesting perhaps that if a person is very much aware of what their intentions are, and that person says, I know what he had in mind, he can go with that. I think the problem is that most people should know that even when they are aware of one intent, it doesn't mean that they themselves did not have another intention. They were just not aware of it. Honey, good morning. What's your intent? Is your intent to compliment, or is your intent to apologize, or is your intent to get a credit for something you're about to ask in a half an hour? Like, we don't even know. Most people are not even chapping that. They meant it, but they didn't mean it. They didn't mean this. Right. I mean, that's human nature. By non-tzaddik, meaning by people that are not very clear and very transparent. Okay, moving on to halacha gimel. Here we go to the same principle, guys. Same idea. Moment I acquired something, demai, I cannot just put it back down the way it was. So now let's apply this to hefker. What type of hefker? It says the Mishnah, hamoitzi peiros baderech. You found produce on the side of the road, on the road. I want to add something in parentheses, which is important. Bava Mitzvah, second chapter. There are many times that something that's on the side of the road, even when I pick it up, I don't acquire it. I acquire the mitzvah of Hashav Sadeh. We're not talking about that. And it's not mine. We're talking about something that, let's use the words of Bava Mitzvah, it has no siman. It does not have a halachic identifying mark. In other words, it's a circumstance where the finder owns it. So you're looking at something, a big mitzvah, you pick it up, and you picked it up to eat. I don't know the deal of eating. Maybe you picked it up to acquire it, but let's leave that open. And then v'nimlach latzniya. Then you changed your mind. Now, the Mishnah is teaching you a tangential, if that's the right word, a side rule. V'nimlach means you change your mind. You know what you decided? You don't want to acquire it. But you want to do another mitzvah. And the other mitzvah is lahatzniya. That's a separate mitzvah, which is that we have respect for food. We had a whole sugya whether you are allowed to throw bread or not. We had that in brachas and in other places. If I find food on the road, even if I'm not desiring it for me, there is a mitzvah on me for me to put it on the side of the road so the other people won't trample on it anymore. So that's what happened. He changed it. The iked is he changed his mind. He's not going to keep it for him. But it's not like he's throwing it back down. He says, you know what? I don't want to eat it, but I'm a chai. At least I'm happy I found it. I get to be matzniya it. I get to the word tznius means in this case to hide it, not to hide it. No one else should find it. To take it off the center of the road. You're going to put it on the side of the sidewalk. Here also says the Mishnah, the fact that when you picked it up for 1 second, you had in mind to eat it, you acquired it, had no siman. So lo yatzniya ache ya'aser, as the mai gavaldik. However, let me have another few minutes. Yeah, let's go into the end of the Mishnah. But if from the outside you picked it up, not to eat it, for the mitzvah that we're speaking about, you don't want the food to get destroyed. That's the lahatzniya. So then potter, very similar to the market. It's not that you picked it up. It depends on your intention when you picked it up. Now, Zok the Mishnah. Yes, we know that a chaver is not allowed to pass food on that was under his ownership, even only for a moment, unless he first will tithe it fully from the demai tithes. So says the Mishnah, Kol davar she'ein adam rashoy lemachrei demai. Then equally lo yishlach lachaveroi demai. When you're sending a gift, the rules of a gift then is like the rules of selling. Let me just say what the chiddush is. Well, at first glance, you can say there's no chiddush. There is a chiddush. Let's go back to the second chapter, guys. You know what we learned? We learned that when you have a wholesaler, someone who sells b'mida gasa, does not separate any demai separations. So, the Mishnah is saying that if someone is gifting b'mida gasa, we don't make someone giving a gift more chamur than the guy that's doing a sale. Even though when it comes to doing a sale, remember the Gemara gave two reasons. One reason is because there's very little profit. When you're giving a gift, there's no profit. So you can argue by a gift, Lamainaf Kamina. No, we don't do that. We say whatever is chayiv by sale, that's chayiv by a gift. Midadako, the gifter is chayiv. Midagasa, the recipient is chayiv. And now finally, the Mishnah has one exception. In what direction? Rabbi Yosi mater bevadai ubevat sheyadenu. Rabbi Yosi says that a gift is not like a sale when it comes to tevel. You see, by demai it is always the same. If you're giving a large gift, you don't have to tithe the demai. If you're giving a small gift, you have to tithe. By tevel, whether I give a large gift, by tevel, by when I sell tevel, whether I'm a wholesaler, whether I'm a retailer, by tevel, I have to separate. The tevel madai, by a gift not. Ironically, since tevel is so chamor, since no one will eat without taking the truma gedola and everything else. So therefore, Rabbi Yosi mate bevadai. But with one thing, you have to let the recipient of your gift know. By sale, we don't say it, but by a gift, we separate them. Listen, I'm giving you a gift, but you have to deal with all of the ma'aser, so you have to say it's tevel badai. That's important. Some people you think they're chaverim, they're amaratzim, but even an amaretz would separate from